Good morning, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this week's Weekly Energy Boost. My name is Elisheva, and I'm here as usual with David.
As usual,
which I'm changing it up today. We are excited to have with us this morning Monica Berg, who is an author, who is the communications director of the Kabbalah Center and a great friend to both of us here. Monica's going to not only participate in the conversation about this week's energy, but also share with us about her new book, Rethink Love, her new podcast, Spiritually Hungry, and so much more. We'll get to that in a second. If you're new to the show, Weekly Energy Boost is a 7-day spiritual energy forecast. David and I spend the 7 days prior poring over Kabbalistic texts. Pouring. We are both Kabbalah Center teachers, and we do our best to provide our listeners with the most powerful and most practical wisdom, not only for the coming 7 days, but lessons and tools that you can use throughout your lifetime. So,
and I know that I think for a while we've been trying to coordinate when Monica was in town. We used to always have our guests that have to be in town, come to the studio with us. But from a technology point of view, I think now we can bring in hosts from all around the world. So this made it much easier to be able to coordinate our schedules.
Our world has been Zoomified, so we're able to have Monica live from New York.
And also I want to say something before we bring Monica on video is I think what a lot of people don't know is we're talking about concepts. We're not just reading concepts from a book or from the Zohar, from Kabbalist text. We try to bring in text from everywhere. And Monica herself is not just talking from a conceptual point of view, but we all have experience one-on-one with people. We're talking thousands upon thousands of hours of personal coaching where we get to experience all of these things. And especially that today we're talking about relationships. I know that that's been Monica's major focus besides everything else she does within the Kabbalah Center and teaching and seminars, a lot of one-on-one getting into the weeds with relationships, thousands of couples, all kinds, all fates, when it's good, when it's bad, when, we're going to be talking about everything. So we want people to think of questions that they have about relationships because we're going to be also taking them from you live in the comment section. And I believe that I'm live, Kabbalah Center's live, and Monica's live on her feed. So please throw your questions in, and we want to be able to address them.
And if you're listening to the podcast or any of the recordings, you can also email your questions to energyboost@kabbalah.com, and we will get to them as soon as we can.
Yeah.
The final thing I want to mention before we get into the meat and potatoes is we have to talk about the energy of the month as well, as we're starting today. The new moon, today is the new moon of Cancer, so we'll talk a little bit at the end of the show about the month of Cancer, and not to throw juggle too many fruits in the air, but Monica and Michael Berg are also giving a new moon lecture tonight, so we can talk about that as well. Right. For those of you that have the chance to listen live on Monday, you can also connect with the new moon of Cancer tonight. So we'll talk about that before the show is over.
All right, where should we start? So I think that looking at the topic that we have to discuss today and the energy that's going to permeate the week, we want to give an understanding of what Kabbalah says or what we can look forward to this week as far as the opportunities and the pitfalls. And this week happens to be one of those that brings us lots of opportunities to embrace challenges. I think that's the best way to say it. This week they may be coming in the form of criticism and rejection. And I think that begs the conversation about what rejection is and how, listen, it's a fact of life. We want to know how to grow from it and how not to let it destroy us. I think that's the real question. And the destruction comes when we're attached. If I'm attached to a particular outcome in my relationship and I don't get that outcome or I don't get that response or I don't get that feedback, I feel rejection. Even at work, right? If I don't get the kudos or the support or the praise I need, it's going to feel like rejection, which implies that something there on my side is conditional. That's where I think the conversation begins. If I'm going to be conditional, if I get this response, I'm happy. If I don't get this response, I'm upset. Sometimes in our relationships, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but many times when we don't get the response we want, we withhold love. We hold back as retaliation or a form of
of protecting ourselves even. So I think the conversation begins with that discussion about being conditional versus being unconditional. And I know, Monica, you talk about that in your book, the difference between conditional love and unconditional love. And I think the most important question is it possible to learn to be unconditional?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm glad to be here with both of you today. And I love all the things that we are hopefully going to discuss today. When it comes to love, one of the first things I think people need to check themselves about is how are they loving? I think often we think we love unconditionally when we really don't. For instance, when it comes to our children, right? We're all parents, the three of us. And my oldest is 21, my youngest is 7. And I can tell you that when my first one was born, I mean, just the smell of his skin, the feeling of his head cradled in my hand, the amount of love I felt for him was unbelievable, it was palpable, right? And you would say, I love my child absolutely unconditionally. But when they get older and they, go through puberty and they start to see your flaws and imperfections, as all children will, and parents at some point.
I mean, they see your flaws.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your ability to access that love is kind of removed. So with unconditional love, there has to be an aspect always of sharing. The more that you're able to see the other person for their essence and who they are and simply love them because they exist, not what they're giving you, not what they aren't giving you, not how they're giving it to you, but you just love their essence. This is what unconditional love is all about. And of course, it can be learned, but to do that, it requires putting the ego in the back seat and first and foremost, coming from a place of true sharing and caring.
So what I'm getting from this, which is tied into what you just said, Elisheva, is everyone loves everybody until there's that moment where there's judgment or some form of rejection. When the audience is no longer clapping for your performance and they're not, I think, Monica, can we hear Monica? I think she's speaking.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there we go. Okay. So I guess when your audience is no longer, because I just realized that, why do I love my my infant? Because
That's why I love your parenting advice.
my infant's not talking back to me. My infant's not rejecting me or rolling its eyes at me. So it's easier to have that love. But as time goes on.
And you think it's just completely unconditional. I'm awesome. I'm an awesome parent. And then you're going to see as they grow and change, of course, your love is there, but it's actual work to awaken that appreciation for them. I think very often, a lot of people make a lot of assumptions in life, especially when it comes to love. We assume that we're going to have a healthy child, right? That's a natural assumption. And for the most part, most people do. One of my children was born with special needs. So, when that happened, you start to see the falsehoods in what you assume to be true. I think the same can be said in relationships. When somebody has a 6-figure income and you're really in love, and what happens when that income now is no longer there? Do you feel the same love? So I think you have to see what your love is based on. Is it based on getting or is it based on giving? Is it based on receiving or based on sharing?
How will people know? I guess here's the thing. We can all hear this and it sounds amazing, but how can people know until they actually go through it? How do I know that I love someone unconditionally until the rejection happens?
Well, there's ways to test yourself. How often do you feel like you need to withhold things or retaliate because you're not receiving something? It's very often the case that people think they're not happy in a relationship because they're constantly looking at what they're getting. It becomes this transactional thing, more of a commodity than anything else. So I think in those times we can check ourselves daily. How often am I looking at my partner as to what they're giving me, how they're fulfilling my needs or my wants or what I think they should be, versus how often is the question I'm asking, how more can I offer support, love, and friendship, actually? So
I want to actually make a list. This is good because I think our listeners are hearing this. And this always happens. It always sounds great. And then they think, and then when the show's over, it's right back to life. What are the warning signs? So I would like to make maybe 3 warning signs that that you're on that path to the opposite of unconditional love. So the first thing you just said was, I just slipped my mind. What was the first thing?
I hope you're taking notes.
Based on giving or receiving.
Oh, that's right. How often? So this is what I want our audience to have sink in. How often am I thinking of
what I'm getting versus
what I'm getting. What am I getting today, right? We wake up, because I think in the very beginning of a relationship, it is geared towards trying to impress or inspire or to win over the affections of the other person. And then at some point, that transition happens with what am I getting? So that's a warning
Right. So
sign.
it's all about my needs, my expectations, my happiness.
Beautiful.
And in the strongest relationships, you come to realize very early on that your both of your joy and happiness is linked over time together, and nobody owes anybody anything else, not on any level.
I think that also we've spoken about the idea that when I'm giving, when I am sharing, when I do give of myself and whatever, it doesn't have to be cookies, it can be love, it can be wisdom, it can be even just spending time with someone. Am I doing it because I'm doing it for them, or I'm doing it because it allows me to be a better version of myself, right? I can only see my true greatness when I'm sharing. So if I'm sharing because I'm waiting for the other person to give me something or do something or respond in a certain way, it's not really sharing, it's an exchange, right? That's I think a big
You mean
shift
people
for
start keeping score?
Exactly. And we don't go to Macy's and say, or we might not go to Macy's.
I don't think you're going to Macy's.
We don't get to go. We don't get to go to Starbucks and say, "Hey, I'll give you a hug for a latte." Or we don't get to go to Amazon and say, "Listen, I'm going to post positive reviews about you in exchange for my monthly subscribe and save of $500." Right? We have to start looking at sharing as something we do for ourselves, and not because we need something in return.
So what about these relationships where it's like the chewing gum that's lost its taste and you become used to the person? What would you say? Because everybody hits that point. Doesn't matter how strong your relationship is. I'm sure everybody here is at some point you get used to the person, or you just realize that you're good. This relationship is good, and maybe you start focusing your energy elsewhere. What would you say about that, Monica, from your experience with dealing with couples who have faced that wall?
Oh no!
Did we get a frozen connection?
Can you hold on that? Remember that?
Well,
thought?
you tell me, Elisheva. What would you say? The chewing gum has lost its taste. You've gotten used to the relationship.
Well, I'm going to go deep on our listeners. This is usually David's thing, but the Kabbalists talk about this idea called the four phases.
Guys, back. All right, Monica, did you hear my last question?
I love this. Mercury's in retrograde, so this is awesome.
We expected
your
this.
last question is like chewing gum with people tire.
Yeah, or you get used to the relationship from what you've experienced with dealing with couples. What would you suggest for them, either before it's about to happen or it has happened? What are tools that you would give to reverse that or inspire some form of transformation?
Well, here's the thing about relationships. I think that very often people put a lot of effort into finding the one, double dating, blind dating, online dating. It's just through so much discomfort and a lot of great desire, right? They really want to be with someone. Then when they find that person or they get married, then they're on to the next thing. Maybe it's now I'm going to focus on my career or having children or making money, security. And then you stop investing in the relationship. And then when that happens, it does get stale because you start to lose appreciation for that person. It is inevitable. As creatures, as human beings, it's very hard to consistently awaken appreciation for everything and really anything. It's always like, I want more. We have big desires. And while desire is important, it is so important to make sure that you cultivate and constantly awaken appreciation. Because when that is lost, I've seen many couples think that they've fallen out of love with their partner, or that there's somebody better, or they finished their tikkun with them or their process and they want something else. So again, I think in those situations, it's to go back and say, what am I giving? I think a lot of times people stop being friends. They stop having fun. Laughter and levity is a huge part of a successful relationship, because if not, it is work. And so there needs to be that balance, and it needs to be worthwhile. And by going back and making sure that you are friends, that you actually do want to go home at the end of the day and share with your partner what you experienced, or, what you're dreaming of, or what you're curious about, and you want to invite them on their journey and your journey, the only way to do that is to go back and to remind yourself why you chose this person to spend the rest of your life with. And that reminder has to happen daily.
So you're saying that sometimes people look to other relationships, or they start looking for energy outside the relationship, or maybe they think it's time to move on from the relationship because they're in the receiving mode. And if they actually would reverse that and reinvest in the relationship and give, even though they're not inspired to do so, they would see that they actually do love this person and they actually want to stay in this relationship. So for everybody who's listening, if there's an itch that you feel, you start looking outside, you start realizing, wow, this other man or this other woman's appreciating me so much more outside my relationship, or you start thinking about or fantasizing as you know, this is the Pisces show. It's the Pisces is always fantasizing. I did my chart reading the other week with one of our amazing astrologers after we just did this astrology seminar worldwide. And because we're Pisces, I'm Pisces, strong Pisces in my chart. It was a lot of fantasy, a lot of thinking and visualizing about other things beyond what's the reality of what's going on. So when people start having these fantasies or these illusions,
I'm smiling.
Why are you smiling?
Because I also just had an astrology reading, and that was a big part.
That was a big part. And I realized the illusions that we have of wanting something outside, based on what Monica just shared, is. Maybe those illusions are right sometimes, right? But you only know when you go back and reinvest and give, even though you're not inspired to do so, in the relationship you have, or it could be a business. I guess you could apply this to really anything.
I've heard Michael Berg say it in a few different lectures about, we talked about this once in a relationship show also, about ridiculous sharing.
Right.
That when the relationship is feeling energyless or status quo, the best way to turn on your heart light again is to give ridiculously. And whether it mean we say, when do you send flowers? After the fight. Send flowers just because, find a way to put to whatever takes you outside of your comfort zone in that sense. To do it, it's magic, absolutely magical. And
I want to add, I think an important concept is to be emotionally intelligent. And that means that you know a person, you know their history before you were in the picture, you know their past, you know what their dreams of the future are, you know how they spend their time in the day, you know the things to say and not to say because they have trauma from their childhood. And when you're able to be emotionally intelligent, you're so linked and so unified and so together that you don't really look outside for attention or for validation because you feel so heard and seen. And there's a vulnerability that exists between the two of you.
Okay, so you just said something else, and I want to follow up with that. Learning about your partner. I've seen so many times people could be married for a long time, and we'll sit in sessions with them, and then in that session they'll be like, "Oh, I didn't know that about you," or "I didn't know what." And I think that's huge because I realize that, of course, we're naturally learning about our partners every year, but what can we do to accelerate that process to truly understand the trauma of the other person? That person has a different past life than you. That person has different interests and tastes than you. That person has different triggers than you. And I think it's not that obvious to most people in relationships, especially, yeah.
I love your question because the truth is the reason a lot of couples are not emotionally intelligent is because people are not individually emotionally intelligent, meaning that they never had a great relationship with themselves. I mean, the first 8 chapters of my book is all about how to learn to be authentic, to be vulnerable, to remove shame and guilt, and really learn to love yourself, believe that you're deserving of love. So many people stay stuck in that cycle, and then they search for somebody outside that will make them feel whole. And then they get into the relationship and it becomes all about pleasing. So there's never a time where this healthy part comes where you start to discover each other in this way. So my first advice would be get to know you, right? Really start to honor your desires, be kind to yourself, both in your belief systems and in your voice. Act in that way. And when you do that, then you're able to have those conversations with your partner, because it's almost impossible to do that when you're not in a healthy and safe space within yourself.
We have 2 really powerful questions coming from listeners. And I think, Monica, I want to stop you because you said something super powerful and I think essential to this conversation. You mentioned a few minutes ago, people think that they're finished with their tikkun with that person. And I don't think we've ever talked about we've ever used the word tikkun in that context.
Can you define tikkun just for our
So
new
normally we talk about it as the soul's correction process.
Right. Every soul has a correction in this world, a unique correction to them.
Right, which means that there's certain things we came here to transform and certain things we came here to share. And we focused in previous episodes on tikkun as that. You're talking about having a specific correction with another person. What does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah, because somebody just put a lot of people think, and I want you to comment on this, Monica. A lot of people think, oh, well, this relationship is getting sour because the other person's a receiver now. So immediately we're throwing it on the other. Right? That's like when we become so spiritual, we see how the other person's not being spiritual.
Right. It's you, not me. So I think that in relationships, why are they so important? I mean, I fundamentally believe we are meant to cohabitate with somebody else for the rest of our lives. And it's only worth it if you're actually happy. If not, you might as well be alone. So very often, I don't think people fully appreciate enough that your partner is your helpmate. They are supposed to be a mirror to you and vice versa, meaning that you're able to show each other in the most unique way. You put a spotlight on what the other person needs to correct. Now, it's not through saying, you're lazy, or I always knew you needed to change that. It's not with that negative judgmental voice. It's more about awakening something within them that they also want to change, right? Because it's for their greatest good. And again, this only can occur in a healthy way when you are friends and you already have created a vulnerability with one another. So when I say that people think that their tikkun with somebody is over, it means that I have nothing left to learn from this relationship or learn from this person, and I'm done with it. I'm tired. I'm not having fun. And I know I'm going to meet my soulmate on the plane, on the flight I'm about to take. I hear that all the time, or I bumped into them in a taxi. You hear these romantic love stories. And while that might happen, it rarely happens that way. I think far too often people exit a relationship because they're really uncomfortable instead of doing the work. And if they actually did the work, both people could discover amazing things about each other and really rekindle the love and have a beautiful relationship.
Monica, we've frozen. We hear you beautifully, but we've lost the video on you. So
I know. I wasn't going to be picky. I've lost the video on you too. I was like, as long as something's working.
I don't think we need the video. It's fine.
Think we need the
Most
video?
of the people are going to just
I
be
was just
hearing
going to say,
audio
we
anyways.
can talk for a minute and 30 seconds while you refresh.
No, I think it's fine. Yeah.
I'm just worried. I think if we have issues again, even with the sound, I'll drop out and come back again. But I'll settle.
No, I think we have momentum here.
No
I have so many questions on my feed. So here's another one. Very common. One person becomes more conscious, spiritual, Kabbalah or not, and let's say the husband or the wife is totally not into it. I've had so many students, like in the first couple of years, they get so into Kabbalah, and all of a sudden they start judging criticizing their partner,
rejecting their spirituality.
And it's so scary. Well, even if the partner says, you know what, I support you, but just keep me out of it. I get a lot of that. And it's kind of scary to me because sometimes my students will say, does this mean he's not my soulmate? Does this mean I need to move on? I'm like, whoa. So I'm totally against that. I don't think that's what it is at all, because, the creator obviously put you guys together for a reason, and doesn't mean now you bounce because it's inconvenient. So Monica, what would you say about people who are not, and it's rarely that you're on the same spiritual wavelength as your partner, you think your partner is behind spiritually, maybe not even into your practice, what's the advice you would give there?
Well, here's the thing. It's going to take me on to another topic. As you both know, I call myself a change junkie because I used to hate change, like all of us. We want change, but we're afraid of change. We crave comfort, and change is uncomfortable. So I think in couples, it is very normal for one or both to start to change in the relationship. They will desire different things. Now, in this case, we're speaking about spirituality, but really it could be anything, right? And I can't tell you how many times I hear when I sit with couples, they say, what happened to you? You weren't like this when we first got married. You've changed. Well, newsflash, you are going to continuously change for the rest of your life. What couples need to do is to make sure they check in with one another and that they are growing side by side in their change so they can invite one another in their new world. Now, let's say one person's interested in spirituality, they have an awakening, they really want to pursue this, they're thinking in ways they never had before, they're very inspired, and maybe this scares the partner, because a lot of people reject things they're afraid of. That could be one reason. Or maybe they're just not interested in that at this time in their life. I always say to people, you have a responsibility to create the life you want and to live your best life, and it's entirely up to you. And by acting maybe more evolved by the things that you're learning and by transforming through spirituality, you might inspire your partner or you might not. But to be reactive about, I'm going to leave and this isn't the one and it's a sign, I think is a farce. I think there will be many things that come up in life, and you need to invite each other on the journey to give them a chance at least. I can't tell you how many times people just say, okay, that's it, I'm done. They won't join me in this.
We always say how the mistress always seems so exciting, but eventually the mistress becomes the wife also, and it's like the same tikkun process starts over for people. That was just my comment on the side. I just wanted to throw that out there.
David just likes to see my cheeks.
I have to say, Monica, I don't know if you know this, I have to say something that makes
me squirm.
Makes her squirm, at least for a moment. It's I think it's part of why people
tune in.
Tune in live for that.
Well, I wanted to ask, we've been focusing a lot on relationships in the last, 25 minutes or so. I want to talk to our single listeners, our single followers who are genuinely trying to work on themselves, whether through the study of Kabbalah or spirituality in general, self-help. There's so many ways that you can grow and expand yourself. What's the best way to approach, especially in the face of rejection? How many times a person's heart can be broken, or is it even worth it anymore to put yourself out there? I hear things like that all the time.
So what kind of a person are you talking about now? We have different types of single people.
Well, I want to spend a few minutes talking to them, whether they're people who are excited, optimistic, energized, despite everything, to the end of the spectrum where people aren't even bothering, because why risk the rejection? Why risk the failure just to have
or the dating has been really draining, lots of draining dates. So what's your best advice for single people, Monica?
Well, here's the thing though. If we're talking about fear of failure or rejection, why even try, some of the things that you mentioned, Elisheva, I think that let's just talk about rejection for a second. Rejection isn't such a bad thing necessarily. Okay. It only really harms us when we think innately that we're not worthy. Okay. We don't have self-worth. We don't have self-love. We don't have self-care. And so then what you've done is you assign the other, everything external, as being and giving them a lot of power over you, right? So if they reject you, that means you're right. You have no value. If they want you, then that means that you're valuable, right? If we talk about the difference between feedback and validation, for instance, right? Validation is somebody who makes you better, right? Versus feedback is give me information that's going to help make me better, right? It's two different things. So I think, again, the first part for anybody who's finding themselves single, and this is their headspace, this is where they're thinking, and these are their thoughts. The only relationship you need to focus on right now, and very actively and very urgently, is the one you have with yourself. Because you will assign all of this to somebody else, and in the end, it's still not going to work. Because for instance, if you don't feel like you're beautiful, right? You never thought you were pretty, and then suddenly you meet somebody and he's telling you you're gorgeous, you're amazing, and then let's say you break up and now you're not getting that validation anymore, then you're going to go back to feeling not pretty again.
So what's the best? Everybody hates criticism. What would be a practical way? You're at that moment, you're being rejected or criticized. You feel the void. What do you do at that moment to elevate?
Well, I'll give you it's not even a joke. You know me, I'm a naturopath, but if you take Tylenol, actually, you don't feel rejection. It actually cuts up that emotion. So if you know somebody's about to dump you, you can always take Tylenol. But seriously, I mean, it's true, it works. But my true advice is this. Rejection doesn't mean what you're offering isn't valuable. It just means the person you're trying to give it to is not the recipient of it.
Whoa,
if you understand it like that, that's really powerful.
I got to slow. Whoa. Say that again. Say that again.
So rejection isn't that what you're offering isn't valuable. It's just that the person you're trying to give it to is not the recipient of it. If you look at it like that, what a gift. Then you won't waste your time. You know it's not for them. And now you're going to go off and look for somebody who is worthy.
So I often, my phrasing of that is no isn't rejection, it's protection.
Yep.
That
there exactly. I mean, we've heard it in many different cliches, that one door closes, another one opens. But I have seen so many people go through breakups with people that they genuinely thought were the one, or they really started to be invested in creating a future together, then something happens, or out of the blue, the person turns around and leaves, and it ends up being the best thing that could have happened. Even though in the pain in that moment, it's very hard to connect to, this is the best thing that could happen. But that, I mean, this is not even something that happens in relationships. Again, getting that no can be protection in work, in spirituality, and health. It's really applicable to
all
anything.
that sounds great. Mother, that was an incredibly inspiring line, and we're getting a lot of people commenting about it. I'm going to go deeper in that and play the devil's advocate here. Okay, what I'm giving, it's not being received. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. It means that's not the person who's supposed to receive it. But I really like this person, and I really feel connected to this person, and I don't really want to let go. What do I do?
So this,
I
want Monica to talk about this, because I know it's also part of that.
This is real life.
That low self-esteem or
Exactly.
feelings of shame and
Sure.
unworthiness. That's a magnet for the rejection. and
It's
the
it's great
criticism.
to say, yes, move on, let's have self-esteem. But the reality of it is, if I've ever told anybody that, they'll come back to me 2 hours later and go, okay, great, well, how do I stay in? But I don't want to leave. Like, what do I do?
But this is the thing, okay? When a person finds themselves in that specific place and that kind of thinking is going on, stop and check yourself. What is it that you're looking for? The things that you like in this person, is it things that are speaking to only your five senses? Do you like the way they smell? Do you like the way they taste? Maybe Elisheva's blushing now, but do you like what they're...
She is. You've achieved the
Do you
score.
Do you like financially what they give you, right? If it's just rooted in physical things, which I think that this kind of like I want usually is, it's not going to last anyway.
But I like it. But I think it can. I think it can last. I mean, the money's good. The reputation is
I
good.
can overlook what's not there. People say that I can
overlook.
live without that.
It comes from a good family. I mean, it's the odds of finding something like this, Monica, again, it's very hard. I've already gone through so many bad dates, and this one finally looks good.
But David, that's it. That's the answer. It's that their belief systems, their feelings about themselves are flawed and limited. And this is the greatest opportunity to stop and say, okay, who really am I? What is it that I am able to offer? And actually, where do I want to see myself in 5 years from now, in 10 years from now, in 20 years from now? Not just as a single person, but as a couple. If I go into this relationship and I force myself on it and I don't give up and I chase it, well, is that what I want to do for the rest of my life? Because it'll be exhausting, right? I think sometimes people just have to ask themselves, how am I going to feel about my decision in 10 minutes, in 10 months, in 10 years? And get perspective. The power of perspective is huge. Far too often it's I want, I need, I see it immediate. And that's just, it's not going to last.
How many people do you, I know Elisheva's trying to butt in with other questions and I'm shoving mine in here. How many people do you know that actually will make a proactive move to leave a toxic relationship versus the ones that want to, but eventually only leave when it gets really, really, really bad? What's the ratio there?
I think, again, it really comes down to self-worth. I think most people stay in marriages until they just can't take it anymore. And that's usually after the children are about 16, 17. You know, researchers, studies show that relationships, usually people don't get counsel till the 7th year. And that's when things are already really, imagine 7 years of the same behavior, the same pattern, the same movie, resentment, anger, fighting.
You mean people don't go to therapy or they don't look into the
Until the
relationship?
7th year.
That's a good
Yeah.
sign. That's interesting.
And then usually are divorced by the 10th. But most people stay 20 years into it. I think that's the majority of the people that I speak with. And then they start a new life. And at that point, you know, a lot of the kids are confused. They're like, we never saw you fighting. And I always say fighting's healthy. You just learn, it's called spiritual sparring. Just pick a style that works for both of you. But people that don't fight, it means you just don't care. Where's the passion? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Controversial question. I'm in a marriage. Let's say a person says I'm in a marriage that I'm not happy, but I'm not going to leave it because of the kids. What would you tell them?
Yeah, it's interesting because what does that really mean? I mean, do you want your kids to see you as not unhappy? I mean, let's say then a few things can happen. If people are in a happy marriage, they see both their parents not living to their fullest. They see them both in this place of mediocrity, the place of the almost. It's not good enough. It's not great. It's better than most. At least I'm not alone. Is that really the role model? That's what we want to show our kids. And then if it's really bad, then maybe they see you fighting and screaming or stonewalling, being silent. I mean, they're in the home, right?
They're picking up on that.
What's that?
They're picking up on that.
Yeah. And I think that in the strongest, again, friendships, I think even if couples don't stay together, they still remain friends because they put the kids first and they allow their kids to know that they were created from love and their parents still love them and they will always have that in common, but that they're not for each other. And I think that if parents go on then to live their best life, I think those children will actually be healthier.
I think that's a perspective that's important I think a lot of people find a lot of shame and they think that it's going to destroy the child if there's divorce involved. And the truth is there is an alternate reality where the parents can separate in an amicable way and still be friends and set a good example for the children, right? Either way, it's going to be hard on the children, but there's also tikkun for the children that they need to go through, a correction they need to go through.
Well, I always tell people like when there's trauma that comes up, like serious things, like even COVID, right? Or George Floyd, the riots that ensued, people are like, oh, my kids, I don't know. And I always say, they're looking to you to see how you respond to a situation. And based on your response is how they're going to learn to deal with things that scare them, with trauma, with uncertainty, with chaos. So it's the same thing with divorce. It's the same thing with everything. If you handle it, you take the high road and you handle it with kindness and compassion, that's how they're going to learn to handle things as well.
Beautiful.
I just want to make sure our listeners are aware this whole conversation that we're having, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we chose this topic of rejection, criticism, and embracing those opportunities because this week's landscape is going to provide us with those opportunities. So as you go through the next 7 days, especially being especially mindful of today and tomorrow till Tuesday night, that we're planting seeds for the coming month.
This energy of rejection and criticism has a twofold part, which is it's the weekly energy, but it's also the monthly energy because it's Cancer. New moon of Cancer is today.
Right. Today and tomorrow is the new moon of Cancer. And the every week when we share the potential opportunities that might be coming, what it means is that this week, as you find yourself being criticized, this week, as you find yourself feeling rejected, understand that there is a divine purpose behind it. And by embracing those opportunities rather than rejecting them, do not reject the rejection. The amount of light and growth that we can experience is greater than any other time of year. And David was saying it's also related to the month that we're entering. Cancerians are very sensitive.
Hold on one second. Monica, you're married to a Cancer. Can you give us something?
Well, but he's an elevated.
Yeah, it's a different Cancer. It's more Gemini.
But I do think they are, they feel very, very strongly, and they also hide their emotions usually unless they trust the person completely. So it seems like they're shut down, but it's not. It's just they have this heightened sense of feeling. So I think for all of us, that just is an indication of some of what we'll be experiencing ourselves.
The hard external shell, the soft, mushy insides. That's a great visual for what not only Cancerians can be, but also how we can all behave this month.
Right.
So the advice is really to welcome, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about, Monica, you also alluded to the being able to receive feedback. I would call that positive criticism. My husband and I, we do like a periodic check-in of like, what can I improve? What can you improve?
Really? How often do you do that?
Not that often. I say it's periodic. I would say
you just said often.
Quarterly. Let's say quarterly. We do. We check the balance in the bank, and then we have a review. But I've given that as a suggestion, and I'm not advocating alcoholism. But if you have a glass of wine with your significant other, and you open up to receiving constructive criticism, constructive feedback, in a safe, planned way, right? When does it hurt the most? when you come with daggers to the other person unexpectedly. But if you already, as part of your game plan, have that time to discuss what's great and what could be better, I would say that makes it even comfortable. There's a safety there and a support that you feel that you don't feel when you get attacked because of something you didn't do 3 weeks ago and they're holding on to.
I want to make a link here because a lot of the topics, inspiring topics that you and Monica have shared in the beginning of the show of having self-esteem, understanding yourself, self-worth, being internally strong, and then what you just said is a practical tool that checking in or setting proactive time where you talk with your significant other about yourself, about how you feel, about how both of you can improve, is a proactive way of actually becoming strong internally and making the relationship strong. And if you're single, this is an exercise you can do with a coach, a mentor, a friend that you trust. Feedback is so important because if you don't look for it proactively, you'll get it in a reactive way, in a hurtful way, in a tone you don't like from a person you didn't expect it from. And then you'll just shut down and you won't get the lesson, and the lesson has to repeat itself. So I just wanted to make that connection because our audience sometimes is inspired, but they also need practical tools of how to achieve that.
Absolutely.
I mean, the thing that is, and I think it's really important to talk about this, is this concept of vulnerability, because I think that word has a bad rap. I think far too often people think it's weak to be vulnerable.
It's a weakness.
Because it feels that way, right? I mean, opening up yourself to the possibility of being physically or emotionally wounded. That's basically the definition of vulnerability. But if we realize that it's not really a choice because you're already vulnerable every single day of your life, then you're going to seize the opportunity to do so, right? And I think in the strongest relationships, couples have learned to do this because the beautiful thing about being vulnerable is that it creates a deep connection with your significant other. I mean, even just by walking in the room, you can look at each other and know what the other one's thinking, feeling, or what they've been through in that day, or what kind of day they've had, right? So I think that it's important to set the time, and yes, you can do that, but I think you need to come and actually have this conversation. Like, this is uncomfortable, and we're both going to practice vulnerability. You go first. It's approaching it very softly, as if you're just getting to know somebody and becoming their friend.
What if people don't like to open up with their significant other because they genuinely feel, or every time you open up, the other person immediately starts attacking, giving suggestions, not really listening, not really being compassionate, trying to fix you.
And I love that. I love what you're saying, because that's what happens, and that's why people avoid vulnerability. Right. But this is where emotional intelligence comes in, because the opposite of being emotionally intelligent is to be a disengaged couple, right? And you can imagine what that looks like. Instead of affection and humor and empathy, it's marked with absence, really. And that feels very isolating. But my point is this: if you choose to stay married and you got married, you want to be together for years to come, then you got to figure this out, right? So early in my marriage, I'll give you an example. Before we were emotionally intelligent, I remember when we would get in an argument or something, my husband, Mikhail, he would say, that's just crazy. And I would get enraged.
Wow,
I mean, I would say, don't you, because the way I heard it was, don't call me crazy. And he wasn't calling me crazy. Now, why did it make me so angry? And he had no idea, right? Because we were not emotionally intelligent. I hadn't opened up at that point how much I was afraid of schizophrenia, because my uncle became schizophrenic when I was 7, and it was terrifying for me, which I've written about. But at that time, he didn't know anything, right? So when he said that's crazy, I heard him calling me crazy.
Wow.
Once I shared this with him, right? And I was able to say, okay, listen, I know this doesn't make sense. Because he's like, why are you freaking out? I was like, I would get enraged. And so once I explained it to him, then he had empathy, right? And he said, okay, I'm never going to do that again. And I think far too often, we're not aware of the movies in our own heads, but we expect our partner to be aware of those movies. And it's impossible if you're not even aware of your own, right? So it's about unpeeling all of these layers that we all have. We're so complex. It's so nuanced.
We could have a whole show just about the things that we say. Because now I'm thinking, like, what are just things I say? It's just like, that's like what I say, right? I mean, the way that Monica's husband says, that's crazy. Like, we say these things.
Well, he doesn't say it anymore.
I know he doesn't say it. He doesn't say it anymore. But now I'm thinking that there are things that I'm sure Elisheva and I, we say in our marriage or to anybody, and to us it's kind of like, yeah, that's like conversational. But to somebody else, hurtful. It's a massive trigger. And I guess that's okay with like friends and whatever, but when you have that in your home and you got that, you're in it all the time, it can become abusive.
And I'll tell you, give you another example, because it's really simple. It's like these little
No,
things.
these examples are great, by the way. It's how
adjust, you know, like small things that you can fine tune, and it really can change overnight. So another thing, you know, I'm from a Middle Eastern family like you, David, and my father always would say, you know, you made a mistake. You should have done this. You should have done that. Why didn't you do that? You're going to regret it. So when Mikhail and I also were first married, he's like, you know, you really should have. You can fill in the blank. That didn't matter what it was. You know, that wasn't the right way to do it. I'd be like, oh, I'm not going to listen to anything you're saying. And I would just like shut down completely, would not hear a word he was saying. Now that wasn't fair to him because he didn't know why he was triggering me. So again, when we've started to become more emotionally intelligent, I was like, well, you know what? I realized that I can't hear you when you even just use those 3 words, because it sounds like my father. And it sounds like I have no options and my life's over. Like that's what I had growing up. And I just can't hear you that way. And now he never uses that word. He's like, maybe this might be a good idea, right? That I can hear.
Trigger words. You got to have a conversation with your partner about trigger words. Because I'm
based
also
on your own past, your own
exactly.
movie. Yeah.
Because I also now that what you're saying sounds important to also understand the relationship that our significant other or friend or business partner has with their parents, with models in their life, because depending on what that relationship is, that's going to be the lowest hanging fruit of understanding how you're activating this person. And of course, spiritually, we know that if you didn't deal with your issues with one family member, you're going to have to deal with it in your relationship anyway. So they're always going to overlap.
I think that it's not.
Elisheva keeps wanting to put it.
I just want to say this one thing, and then it's Elisheva's turn.
I only have a question.
And then I'm going to follow up based on what you just said, Monica.
I'm not used to 3 people. I'm used to 2. I think that it's not just your parents. I think you have to look back to the things that created the most impact for you, positive or negative, right? What were the things that were most traumatic for you? What were the things that affected you the most when you were growing up at different ages and different stages? Those are the things that indicate how you respond to things now as an adult. And that's where your triggers will be.
I have 6,000 more questions, Elisheva.
Stop it. Okay, so I've noticed a phenomenon with the people that I work with, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I want to hear what Monica has to say about this. A lot of people, I think, as a result of the rejection and the criticism, shut down and tell themselves, well, I'm not meant to be in a relationship, or I'm not meant to be happy, or maybe it's not for me in this lifetime, blah, 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 blah.
Or being single is actually very fun. Just casually dating. Why commit? Sounds like so many more problems come up.
Okay, I don't know anybody that talks like that, but I do feel, even from people who have that spiritual background, they're looking at, I'm trying to force something. Maybe it's not meant to be. What do you tell people who have that, or who are trying to adopt that perspective?
Yeah, I would say that they're probably not being fully honest with themselves. That's really what I believe, because I think that might be something that works for them, maybe even for 20 years. I like being alone. You know, I don't have to compromise my friends or my, everything. I don't have to share anything with anybody. I'm really comfortable and I really like it. But I think that if, again, you fast forward 20 years later, will that really work for you? And I've had this kind of conversation with people. And when they're really being honest, they say, yeah, probably not, but I want to do this now. I think that, again, it goes back to the stories we tell ourselves and why we tell them. And by the way, we are storytellers by nature. That's part of our culture. That's how we are raised. But very often we create stories that make us feel good about choices we're making, even if we know they're not the best choices.
I want to make sure we give Monica time to share with us about the webinar series that's starting.
Well, yeah,
Wednesday.
I wanted to plug that real quick, and then Monica can maybe add a little to it. I wanted to plug it because genuinely, I think that our audience would love it and be geared to it, and it's free. Why not? I mean, they listen to our show for free. Frame
that a second. Well, I'm not talking about the podcast. I'm talking about the webinars.
Yeah, I'm talking about the webinar first. I think the first thing is that Monica is going to have. This has been really popular. I think once a month we're doing these worldwide webinars, different topics. We did one on astrology. We did Kabbalah one that way, And Monica's going to do Rethink Love, basically love, soulmate, dating, she'll throw sex in
Maybe
there.
Monica, can you share with us 60 seconds about the webinar?
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. It's going to be 3 weeks starting this Wednesday at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, 4:30 Pacific. You will get a recording. But the most important thing, it's super exciting. We're going to do workshops. I'm going to take you through different tools, concepts. I'm going to tell you stories about myself. People are going to share live. And it's profound information. It works. It's a mix of science, Kabbalah, my own personal life stories, as well as couples I've worked with for over a decade.
So it's a pay what you can, but if you're able to pay $50, you'll get the book as well.
Yeah, because it's all going to charity.
Right,
All,
it's donation based. So you pay what you can, and if you're able to pay $50 for the 3 weeks, you get the book is included. And if you're able to do 75 or higher, you get the book, the workbook, and the 3 weeks.
Right. It's a way to incentivize people to be more charitable. But if you can't afford or you just want to try it out, even $0 or $1 or whatever it is, we did it this way so that everybody can feel good about where they're at financially, but be able to connect to spirituality. And it's all going for a good cause. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think so many people love the podcast format. And Michael and Monica have a weekly podcast that they do called Spiritually Hungry. And it comes
every Tuesday.
Every Tuesday is
so
a
tomorrow there'll be a new episode.
Tomorrow will be a new episode. All you got to do is go into iTunes or your podcast app and just type in Spiritually Hungry. It's going to pop up and then you subscribe. And you'll have that content on your phone fresh every week. I mean, I have 100 more questions.
I just wanted to add to the last thing we were speaking about, because I think it's really important. I really feel like people get stuck here in life, and it really actually brings me pain, because sometimes we don't realize the choices we're making, again, if we're not able to be honest with ourselves. So if we understand that our past experiences are stored in our memory, like movies, right? And so with each experience we've had, whether we were the villain or the hero, or it was a great love story or it wasn't, or we felt rejection or pain, you carry that around and it informs your choices in the future. So I think that if you find yourself with things like, I don't want this, I never want that, those kinds of like finite terms, go back and ask yourself, what is creating that kind of dialogue with it? And maybe there's something that you haven't fully healed from, and that you can actually go back and look at it from fresh eyes and from the space you're in, and choose to see the light, even in the most challenging experience you may have had.
So if you have a black and white perspective on something, probably comes from hurt and pain. That's what I got from that, and we got to look into that. That's good.
All right. Well, thank you, Monica, for finally joining us, and we really hope that you'll be able to join us again. We have.
Oh, we're gonna make it happen.
We have lots of opportunities coming in the coming months to bring you back to talk more about these things with us. As David said, the Spiritually Hungry podcast is available where all podcasts are found, every platform. You can find us as well on those platforms, including Facebook, IGTV, and YouTube.
And you can comment and ask questions throughout the week. And when you like and share, our audience grows as it has. And we're getting emails and messages every week from brand new people because you shared, you commented for them, and they're being exposed to high-level wisdom given in a practical way. So we thank you for that. That's the best thing you can do for us is when you share our show.
Last thing to remind you all, today and tomorrow, Monday and Tuesday, is the new moon of Cancer. So be your best selves for these 48 hours. If you want to connect with Monica and Michael tonight for the new moon of Cancer lecture and meditation, you can find all of those details on Kabbalah.com. We'll post the link in the comments as well. Have a fabulous week and see you next time on the Weekly Energy Boost.